Have you ever had your peaceful day completely ruined by someone who thinks the rules only apply to others? That's exactly what happened to me one afternoon at the public library. A place I thought was safe, calm, and free of drama. I couldn't have been more wrong. It all started on a cloudy Tuesday. I had just finished a long morning on the farm. My cows had been restless. And yes, one of them nearly kicked over the feed bucket. By the time I walked into the library, I was ready for nothing but silence and a good book. I picked out a novel, settled into one of the big wooden chairs near the window, and finally exhaled. That's when she arrived. Karen, the kind of woman who could weaponize a whisper. Blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses indoors, and a sharp click of heels that echoed like a fire alarm across the quiet section. She strutted through the aisles like she owned the place, then zeroed in on me like a hawk spotting prey. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice loud enough to make two students at the computer terminals glance up. "You don't belong here. This section is for members only." At first I thought she was joking. Members only? It was a public library. Anyone could sit down and read. I smiled politely and went back to my book. But Karen wasn't finished. She marched closer, towering over me, and hissed, "I've seen you around town. You're the one with those cows, aren't you? This place is for people who actually read, not farmers covered in dirt." The room went so silent you could have heard a pin drop. My cheeks burned, but not from embarrassment, from anger. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the librarian appeared. Mrs. Patterson, a gentle woman in her 60s who'd worked there for decades. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice, just stepped between Karen and me with a look of calm authority. "Karen," she said firmly, "that's enough. He has just as much right to be here as anyone else. In fact," she turned toward me, holding out a leather-bound guest book I'd never noticed before. "Would you do me the honor of signing our reader's registry?" Karen's jaw dropped. Mine nearly did too. The librarian wasn't scolding me. She was honoring me, while Karen fumed like a kettle about to boil over. And that was only the beginning. You'd think Karen would have backed off after the librarian publicly shut her down, right? Wrong. If anything, it only fueled her. Some people just can't stand losing control. And Karen was one of them. As I signed the reader's registry with the librarian's elegant fountain pen, Karen hovered nearby, muttering under her breath, like a simmering pot about to spill over. A couple of teens in the corner exchanged amused glances. To them, it was probably the best entertainment they'd seen all week. "Ridiculous," Karen hissed. "Letting farmers put their names in the registry? Next thing you know, we'll be inviting barn animals to story hour." The librarian didn't even flinch. She simply gave me a smile as if to say, "Don't let her get to you." But Karen wasn't done. She dramatically pulled her phone from her oversized designer purse and announced loudly, "I'm calling the board. This is a violation of policy. You don't belong here and I'll prove it." The room grew tense. Even Mrs. Patterson looked weary, like she'd dealt with Karen's antics one too many times. Still, the librarian stood her ground. "Karen," she said softly but firmly, "this library doesn't discriminate. Everyone is welcome. You may call whoever you wish, but the policies won't change." Karen's eyes narrowed. She turned her attention back to me. "You think you're special, don't you? Just because she handed you that pen. Well, I know your type. You don't read books. You probably use them as doorstops in your barn." The jab stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd spent years being underestimated because of my work. People assumed farming meant ignorance. But here I was, someone who loved reading more than television, someone who found peace in the pages of history and novels after long days in the fields. I looked her in the eye and calmly said, "Actually, Karen, I read more books in a month than most people do in a year. Maybe you should try it sometime." Gasps fluttered across the room like birds scattering. Karen's face flushed crimson. For a moment, she was speechless, something I wasn't sure was even possible. Then she snapped, "That's it. If the board won't listen, I'll have the mayor handle this. You'll see. People like you don't last in places like this." Her words hung heavy in the air, but Mrs. Patterson remained unshaken. She placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Don't worry. You'll want to stay for what comes next." And trust me, she was right. Karen stormed out of the library, her heels clicking furiously against the tile floor. The door slammed so hard the windows rattled, and for a brief moment, the room sighed in relief. A few people even chuckled quietly. But I knew it wasn't over. Not with Karen. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, the glass doors swung open again. Karen marched back in, phone in hand, a smug grin plastered across her face. Behind her trailed none other than Councilman Robert Hargrove, a tall, stiff man in a gray suit who always looked like he was auditioning for a political campaign. Karen announced her return like a conquering hero. "See? I told you I'd bring someone with actual authority. Councilman Hargrove will set things straight." Whispers spread through the library like wildfire. Even Mrs. Patterson's expression darkened. The councilman adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "I've received a complaint that someone is using this library outside of membership rules." Mrs. Patterson didn't budge. "Councilman," she said firmly, "this is a public library. Membership isn't a barrier to entry. Everyone is allowed here." Karen butted in before he could respond. "But look at him!" She pointed at me like I was some sort of intruder. "He's a farmer. His clothes smell like the outdoors. This is supposed to be a place of learning, not livestock." The insult stung, but I refused to show it. Instead, I folded my arms and stood tall. The councilman studied me, then looked at the open guest book on the counter. His brows lifted. "Wait, is that his name in the reader's registry?" Mrs. Patterson smiled proudly. "Yes, he's now part of our library's tradition. That registry is reserved for patrons who make a positive impact in the community." The councilman tilted his head. "Impact? What exactly has he done?" Before I could answer, the door creaked again. To everyone's surprise, a group of local students rushed in. They were from the high school down the road, kids who often visited my farm for tours. One of them, Emily, spoke up. "He helps us all the time. He lets us take notes for our agricultural projects. He even taught us how to plant a garden for our science fair." Another chimed in, "Yeah, he's the reason we even come here to study. We wouldn't have half our research without him." The room erupted in agreement. Karen's face froze, her smugness draining away. Councilman Hargrove's gaze shifted back to me, a new respect forming in his eyes. And that's when things really took an unexpected turn. The councilman stood silent for a moment, weighing the room's energy. Karen tapped her heel impatiently, clearly expecting him to take her side. But the tide had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Mrs. Patterson gently closed the guest book and placed it in front of him. "Councilman Hargrove," she said with quiet authority, "this young man deserves recognition, not ridicule. His contributions to the community are already documented. But today, I'd like you to witness it." He adjusted his glasses and leaned over the open page where my fresh signature glistened in blue ink. For a long pause, he simply studied it. Then, to everyone's shock, he picked up the fountain pen himself. With deliberate strokes, he added his own signature beneath mine. The room gasped. "By adding my name," the councilman said, turning toward the crowd. "I am recognizing this man not just as a patron of this library, but as a valued member of our town. His work educating students, supporting families, and even teaching sustainability deserves our respect." Karen's jaw dropped. "What?" Her voice cracked like shattered glass. "You can't be serious. He's just what?" Councilman Hargrove cut her off sharply. "A farmer." "Karen, the very food on your plate comes from people like him. If anyone deserves a place in this library, it's him." Applause broke out. First from the students, then from the adults, and finally even from a couple of strangers who had been quietly reading in the back. The sound echoed off the library's high ceilings until the entire room felt alive. Karen's face burned crimson. She tried one last desperate move. "This isn't fair. You're all against me." But the librarian calmly placed a hand on her shoulder. "Karen, libraries are built on fairness. You're welcome here, but only if you respect others. Otherwise, the door works both ways." Karen sputtered, looked around. then stormed out again, this time without an audience willing to follow. As the echo of her departure faded, Mrs. Patterson turned to me with a warm smile. You see? The library isn't just about books. It's about people. And you, my dear, belong here. The councilman nodded in agreement. Keep signing pages, in books, in registries, in lives. That's the real legacy. For the first time all day, I felt completely at peace. Not just because Karen had lost, but because I'd been reminded of something deeper. Dignity doesn't come from titles or appearances. It comes from the impact you make, quietly, every day. And in that moment, surrounded by shelves of stories, I realized mine had just turned a page, enjoying this wild story of how a simple library visit turned into a full-blown showdown. Tap subscribe to catch more unbelievable real-life dramas like this one. If this made you laugh or shake your head at Karen, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, what's the most unexpected place you've ever seen drama unfold?